Okay, anyway, great to be here in front of real people in a nice room. So I'm going to read from this thing, From, which, is, as Ghazal said, came out some time ago now. We were hoping to do a launch that wasn't a Zoom launch, and here we are. Is that working? Ha ha ha! Yeah? From. Why is this book here? I think as I got older, being old now, as I get older, I suddenly found I was having struggled for years to come up with ideas for things to write and not being able to do it and taking a long time to get going. Suddenly I reached the point where I was coming up with too many ideas for books, and I couldn't possibly write them all. And I didn't have any time to write them. So I thought a good idea, and I could bring this book out posthumously, would be to write a book called From, in which I just wrote, 1 or 2 chapters from each book, and then you could publish it, and that would solve my problem. So this is a sort of extract from that, which I hope will come out posthumously one day. But this is From, so it's a little extract of that book, which will be a big book one day. And this is a little book, and I'm going to read you 5 little bits from it, so you'll get about bits of 5 books in about 15 minutes. I'll just check. Yeah. Okay, so the first one is from What is Poetry? And this is just a little bit of that. An artist takes 2 leaves and fixes them together with a paperclip. He calls this piece bureaucracy. The artist is the Catalan, Joan Brossa. The piece is an example of one of his poem objects. This is not what we would normally think of as a poem, but if it is a poem, it is perhaps because it presents us with likeness, as in the simile, and also unlikeness, also part of the simile, necessarily, though we sometimes forget this. The leaf is like the sheets of paper we file away in our filing cabinets. We speak of leaves of paper, but it is also unlike paper. And it is in this unlikeness, as much as in likeness, that the force of the poem resides. For while it seems natural to affix a paperclip to 2 sheets of paper, it borders on the absurd, and here we confront the surrealism of Brossa's work to carry out the same operation on the leaves of a tree. What is concrete poetry? Concrete poetry is not the same as concrete, but it has some similarities. Reading an introduction to concrete work, with certain sentences I can substitute the words concrete poetry for concrete, and it still makes good sense. If concrete poetry is to be strong, watertight and durable, it must be dense. Or if fresh concrete poetry is put in an oven, it will dry out quickly and crumble to pieces. With other sentences, the sense is less clear. Simply stated, concrete poetry is a mixture of cement and other materials known as aggregates, which sets in a hard mass when water is added. Or, when concrete poetry is placed under water, a tremie is used. This is a pipe with a funnel at the top and a valve at the bottom, and is sufficiently long for the funnel to be above the water when the bottom of the pipe is resting on the bed of the sea or river. Even here, though, the result is a kind of poetry, even if it is not concrete poetry. Is poetry, then, what escapes when translating concrete into concrete poetry? I remember at school we had a geography teacher called Mr. Poole, and that we sang Daddy Poole to the tune of Daddy Cool, and that the whole class got lines. I must not sing Daddy Poole in class. As we sat in the hall, hidden amongst the hundreds of lines we had to write out, we would insert phrases like, I must not sing Daddy Poole can go fuck himself in class, etc. At the time, this seemed like a harmless way of getting back at the teacher for overreacting to the situation, but now I'd see these not-to-be-read lines as a kind of poetry. Like poetry, they are quietly subversive. Like poetry, they speak that which must not be spoken. Like poetry, they reintroduce play into language. Like poetry, they bear witness. Like poetry, they are passed about among friends. Like poetry, they turn defeat into celebration. And this is from Border Ballads. Border Ballade. The idea was to cut off bits of ballads and see what was left. It didn't really work a lot of the time, but this one I quite like. Called Ravens. Sat on a tree, hay down. Sat on a tree with a down. Sat on a tree, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on a fence, hay down. Sat on a fence with a down. Sat on a fence, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on a lamppost, hay down. Sat on a lamppost with a down. Sat on a lamppost, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on a tyre, hay down. Sat on a tyre with a down. Sat on a tyre, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on a steeple, hay down. Sat on a steeple with a down. Sat on a steeple, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on a baked bean, hay down. Sat on a baked bean with a down. Sat on a baked bean, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on roadkill, hay down. Sat on roadkill with a down. Sat on roadkill, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on an aerial, hay down. Sat on an aerial with a down. Sat on an aerial, might be, derry, down, down. Sat on a tree, hay down. Sat on a tree with a down. Sat on a tree, might be, derry, down, down. And this is from 64 variations on a blank page. So you get a blank page every time, and then you get a little footnote at the bottom about the blank page. And I think probably I Ching was thrown about a little bit while doing this. Fifth variation. Clouds drift across the sky as if in expectation of some unforeseen event. Are the clouds going to disperse, or is it going to rain? You open your rucksack looking for the water bottle you have left at home on the bedside table. Seventh variation. The army. With firm correctness and an experienced leader, there will be good fortune and no error. Believing the opposite to be true, you turn the page swiftly and move on. Ninth variation. The empty fridge, when examined closely, is never empty. The same is true of the blank page. It always hides a story, a picture, an image. Look closely at this one and you will see wind, a wheel with spokes missing, falling rain, the moon approaching its fullness. 15th variation. The superior poet, though full of metaphors, cultivates silence. And this is one from, there are quite a few of these, Invisible Universities, which is repurposing Calvino's Invisible Cities. Continuous Universities. 1. The University of Tomorrow refashions itself every day. Each morning the students wake between brand new sheets, wash with just unwrapped and rebranded bars of soap, wear just delivered college gowns, take from the latest model refrigerator still unopened ready meals, listening to the last minute jingles of the college radio station, which broadcasts each day under a different name, and make their way to faculties which have been reorganised overnight to deliver the tomorrow experience. On the walkways, encased in spotless polythene bags, the remains of yesterday's tomorrow await the garbage truck. Not only squeezed tubes of toothpaste, blown-out light bulbs, newspapers, fast food containers, wrapping, but also boilers, encyclopedias, pianos, out-of-date curricula, sculptures, overhead projectors, blackboards, books, and DVDs. It is not so much by the things which each day are manufactured, sold, and purchased that you can measure UOT's success, but rather by the things that each day are thrown out to make room for the new. So you begin to wonder if UOT's true passion is really, as they maintain in their mission statement, the delivery of new and different ways of learning, and not instead the feverish joy of expelling, discarding, and cleansing itself of a recurrent impurity inherent in the educational system. The fact is that it is the cleaners and the garbage collectors here who command the highest salaries and the best protected pensions, and their task of removing the residue of yesterday's educational experience is surrounded by respectful silence, like a ritual that inspires devotion, perhaps only because once things have been cast off, nobody wants to have to think about them further. Nobody wonders where each day they carry their load of refuse, outside the university grounds to be sure. But each year the university expands to hit new targets, and the cleaners and garbage collectors have to fall farther back. The bulk of the outflow increases and the piles rise higher, become stratified, extend over a wider perimeter. Besides, the more UOT's talent for devising new educational methodologies and materials excels, the more the rubbish improves in quality, resists time, the elements, fermentations, recycling, combustion. A fortress of indestructible leftovers surrounds UOT, dominating it on every side like a chain of mountains. This is the result. The more UOT expels goods, the more it accumulates them. The scales of its past are soldered into a straitjacket that cannot be removed. As the university is renewed each day, it preserves all of itself in its only definitive form. Yesterday's sweepings piled up on the sweepings of the day before yesterday, and of all its days and years and decades. UOT's rubbish, little by little, would invade the world if from beyond the final crest of its boundless rubbish heap, the cleaners and the garbage collectors of other competitor universities were not pressing, also pushing mountains of refuse in front of themselves. Perhaps the whole world beyond UOT's boundaries is covered by craters of rubbish, each surrounding a university in constant eruption. The boundaries between the hostile competitor universities are rat-infested ramparts where the detritus of both support each other, overlap, mingle. The greater its height grows, the more the danger of a landslide looms. A tin can, a laptop, a copy of Hamlet, if it slides towards UOT, is enough to bring with it an avalanche of old timetables, prospectuses, mortarboards, submerging the university in its own past, which it has tried in vain to reject, mingling with the past of its rival universities from which it had tried so zealously to distinguish itself. A cataclysm will flatten the sordid mountain range, cancelling every trace of the university always dressed up in new clothes. In the neighbouring universities, the vice-chancellors are all poised, waiting with bulldozers to flatten the terrain, to push into the new territory, expand and drive the new cleaners and garbage collectors still farther out. And finally, this is from Longer. So these take Richard Long's sort of text that he gets from walking. He walks a very long distance and produces these really nice, quite minimal texts. So this just takes some of his pieces and makes them longer. Using a dictionary, so it's automatic. which is great, because I have no responsibility for the results with this kind of thing. From longer. An act of going on foot of 7 solar days of 24 hours, beginning at midnight on the landmass that projects conspicuously above its surroundings, of the name of Chokai Honsu, Japan, 2003. Experiencing the natural periodic suspension of consciousness that is essential for the physical and mental well-being of higher animals on the narrow path for pedestrians. The slope of the landmass that projects conspicuously above its surroundings under violent streams of water. The place at which devotion is paid to a saint or deity, on the highest point, in a visible mass of water or ice. Paths beaten as if by feet in soft, wet earth, across areas of land free of woods and buildings, covered in white flakes consisting of small ice crystals formed directly from vapour in the atmosphere. Suborders of long, slender-bodied, often brightly coloured insects that have a fine network of veins in their wings and often live near water on the collapsible shelter, stretched and supported by poles. Experiencing the natural periodic suspension of consciousness that is essential for the physical and mental well-being of higher animals by 2 piles of stones built as memorials or landmarks. A violent earth tremor caused by volcanic action or processes within the Earth's crust, in the dense growth of trees and underbrush covering a large tract of land. Thank you.